Hello, guys and gals, and this is another, I think this is episode 9 of our reading of Strange Monsters and Great Searches by George Laycock. As always, we start off with the copyright information. This is a large print book. This book is copyright 1973 by George Laycock, all rights reserved, published in large print by arrangement with Doubleday and Company, Incorporated, set in Photon 18-point Helvetica medium. And we are to number 9 here, the monster that was too good to last. And we're going to find out what that is about. In the last episode, we talked about the dodo, actually, and how it went extinct. It and the solitaire and other large birds like that. So we are to number 9, the monster that was too good to last. Of all the monsters men have found, few could be more unusual than the one discovered 2 centuries ago in the frigid waters off the coast of Alaska. No person alive today ever saw one of these creatures. They were seen, however, by one of the most famous naturalists of those times. Except for his records, the world might not have the slightest idea today that the creature lived, and what a beast it was. That strange, ponderous mass of flesh and bone lived half submerged in the shallow waters by the edge of the ocean. Its world was one of rocky, barren islands wrapped in fog and swept by bitter winds. These islands are the Aleutians. They lie like a string of unpolished gems stretched out across the northern waters. For 1,100 miles, each of the Aleutian islands is a peak of a submerged mountain, whose base rests on the ocean floor. Together they form a barrier between the Pacific Ocean and the Bering Sea. Today these islands are mostly uninhabited and nearly all lie within the Aleutian Island National Wildlife Refuge. They are the homes of countless thousands of seabirds that fly and glide around the cliffs and mountainsides. Here also live seals and sea otters swimming in the shallow waters. Until 1741, the islands were inhabited only by a group of Stone Age people related to the Eskimos and known as Aleuts. These people had lived there for thousands of years, taking their food from the sea. They considered the islands their ancestral homes, and they knew their strange world better than any other people alive. But it is the nature of people to insist that a land is only discovered when people of their own kind find it. In 1741, foreigners discovered the Aleutian Islands and proclaimed that henceforth they owned them. In that year, the government of Russia had organized and outfitted a daring expedition. At the head of the group was Captain Commander Vitus Bering. His 2 ships had crossed the turbulent straits propelled by the sea winds. Bering's voyage was filled with hazards and heartache. The seas around these islands often whipped up by strong threatening winds. Reefs of jagged rocks hide close to the surface. Bering's ships crashed upon the rocks, and men were stranded on the island, now known as Bering Island. Through the following months, many members of the expedition died there, far from their homes. Those healthy enough to work began rebuilding one of the ships so they might eventually escape again to the comforts of Russia. Among these survivors was the naturalist George Wilhelm Steller. He would leave the only description of the monster these explorers found around the shores of Bering Island. Steller recorded his observations in his notes written in Latin and passed down to present-day scholars. For hour on hour, he sat huddled in the drizzling rain, faithfully writing down descriptions of what he saw, and there must have been times when he scarcely believed it all himself. In the Aleutians, there were animals new to science. Among Shelter's remarkable discoveries were the sea otter, Steller's sea eagle, Steller's jay, and Steller's eider, a sea duck. But the creature that brought the young naturalist the greatest fame was the sea cow. He and the rest of Bering's crew had found wallowing in shallow beds of kelp along the coast of these lonely islands. Steller wrote that these 30-foot mammals live like cattle in the sea. They stayed in herds and seemed constantly to be eating. To obtain food, they wallowed along the shallows, scraping seaweed from the rocks and munching it as they moved their large heads from side to side. Once in a while they would lift their heads out of the water for fresh air. Then they would snuff and snort and go right back to eating. One day the ship's crew began looking hungrily at these giant beasts. The ship's food was gone. The sailors were weak from hunger. Often they were too weak and ill to continue working on the ship, and that was to carry them away from this forsaken land. If they could only capture one of those monsters swimming there so close by, they could soon learn if the creature was good to eat. But how do you sneak up on a monster and catch it? This could be dangerous. The animals, according to Steller's estimates, weighed as much as 4 tons each. Whenever high tide came, the sea cows, as the sailors called them, would move in close to shore, where they would go right on munching seaweed. Finally, the sailors could resist temptation no longer. Instead of a fish hook, they needed a monster hook, and they prepared an iron weapon that looked like a ship's anchor. They then attached it to a rope. When the monster tackle was ready, a small crew moved off in a boat. 30 men on shore held tightly to one end of the rope. At the boat, I think that should be as. It says at, but I'm going to say as. As the boat neared one of the huge animals, the heavy iron hook was lifted by one of the sailors and brought down with a long slashing blow. It hooked into the flesh of the giant animal. At that moment, the sea began to erupt. The creature thrashed about in surprise and pain, and the foaming waves threatened to swamp the little boat. As the men on shore tugged and pulled, their companions in the boat attacked the monstrous sea mammal with every weapon they had. Other sea cows moved in to aid their stricken companion. Some of them tried to upset the bobbing dory by heaving the boat up on their backs. Others attacked the ropes that held the sea cow. They even tried to remove the hook from her back by striking it with their broad tails. But the ship's crew eventually towed the weary, stricken animal to shore and began hacking large chunks of meat from its body. Beneath a 4-inch layer of thick white fat, there appeared red meat that reminded some of the sailors of beefsteak. Sadly, whenever they would leave the scene, the old cow's mate would come back to the shallows and linger close beside her dead body. To Steller, the capture of one of these strange beasts meant more than food. The naturalist saw the event as a new scientific opportunity. For the first time, he could examine the body of a sea cow closely. He could study its structure. He could try to figure out where it belonged in the organization of the animal kingdom. He knew from the beginning that he had discovered one of the most unusual animals on Earth. He skinned and picked and poked at the mass of flesh. The front part was more like an animal that might live on land. In spite of its large head, the sea cow had tiny dark eyes, perhaps no larger than those of a sheep. Time and evolution had given it a tail shaped much like that of a fish. Its body measured 25 feet in girth. Its skin was blackish brown, deeply wrinkled, and it seemed to wear a coat several sizes too large for it. The stomach of one such animal that Steller dissected was 6 feet long. The heart weighed 36 pounds, and the liver had to be cut up to be moved. On other days, Steller studied the actions of these monsters. For 10 months he studied them. The cows, he concluded, had no more than one calf each year, and it was his belief that the adults chose mates for life and formed strong family groups, which would seem to be as good a plan for sea cows as for anyone else. Other ships followed bearing to these newly discovered islands. They were sent out to kill the sea otters and bring back shiploads of their fabulously rich fur. Over the next 100 years, these hunters almost wiped out the sea otters, which had once bobbed in the ocean in fantastic numbers around the Aleutian Islands. The crews of these ships needed food, and like Bering's men, they looked upon the monstrous sea cows as fresh meat. The sea cows' numbers dwindled fast. In 1768, the last of them ever recorded was killed on Bering Island. Perhaps it was the last sea cow on Earth. Only 27 years had passed since the creature was discovered. The remarkable monster had been quickly ushered into extinction. Looking over the roster of Earth's creatures, we find that Steller's sea cow had some distant relatives. Some of its smaller cousins still live. Perhaps best known of these little cousins is the Florida manatee, which today is also threatened with extinction. Like stellar sea cow, the manatee has no hind limbs, and its forelimbs have gradually changed into flippers. It lives in the warmest waters of Florida, around the edge of the Everglades National Park, and in nearby canals. Once it ranged all the way along the coast to North Carolina and westward to southern Texas. Hunting and the constantly changing habitat, however, have taken toll of this half-ton mammal. Today, it is well on the road to extinction. It may soon join its long-gone cousin that lived in the chill waters of Alaska. Explorers have also found other relatives of these big, clumsy swimmers in other parts of the world. 3 species of manatees were identified. There were also 3 species of the related dugong, one each from the Red Sea, Australia, and the Indian Ocean. Scientists studying fossils concluded that they were land animals perhaps 50 million years ago, and in those times, the ancestral creature lived part of its time on land and part in the water. But over the ages, it spent increasing amounts of its time in water. Its body adapted and evolved, gradually acquiring the form of the manatee and the sea cow. It became a massive, leathery bag of blubber and flesh, shaped half like a mammal and half like a fish. In this form, the sea cow was doing very well. It had become a highly successful monster, but monsters we now know come in all sizes. And as big as they were, these monsters by the edge of the sea proved no match for the man-sized creatures that were to discover them. Next, we will be reading An Incredible Search, which I guess goes along with the title of the book, Incredible Searches. Anyways, we have been reading Strange Monsters and Great Searches by George Laycock. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you want to support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.